So this is going to be the final round of the tournament. It looks like Eldrad has picked out the discard deck, and unclear what Kiva's playing. In a second we'll see that it ends up being Anubis, but his other option was a hyper thin robots list, which is not quite as serious. But we see the players going back to some of the classically strong decks here. And this is a pretty good opener for Eldrad. You want to just play as many Bone Knives as possible round one, get as many of those cards, and then be able to Stalker for free wins.
Is there any reason to not mulligan the Stalker at this point?
Well, 2 Bone Knives is typically what you want. So you assume that your opponent will play 1 card out of their hand on the first round, and then you're bone knifing the other 2 cards. And then you have the option of playing the Stalker in round 2 to win it. But it depends, you might just want to hold on to it and only play it if you're like tying. This can be good against decks like Anubis that get a lot weaker after the shuffle. And so we see Kiva is playing Anubis. He has Crossbones take the round. And then Eldrad doesn't have to play a Stalker here. But he's deciding to, and he wants to not let this go super long. And since deck lists are open, he knows exactly what Kiva's playing with. The way that Stalker works, you also typically want to pass so that the opponent plays first and your Stalker is as cheap as possible. And here we see Kiva's just passing, intent on keeping as many cards in hand as possible so that, for example, he doesn't lose this round.
So the last round was essentially just sacrificed?
Yeah, and that's pretty typical of this matchup. You end up trading back and forth, and then things get interesting in the late game. So Kiva presumably could have played one of his cards, but then Stalker would have costed 4, and most of the cards would lose to the 4-point Stalker. And here there's the option of playing Beekeep, but he still has a couple more Bone Knives that he might want to hit. Looks like he's going for it. Again, he probably just passes here if he wants to get to the late game. The only change will be more mana. With Anubis, a lot of times there's a lot of variation that you could see out of the opponent because they end up in a position where they have free Anubis and they have stars and crossbones. There's a lot of granularity with how many points you put down. But since mostly Kiva's been on the back foot, not playing cards, he doesn't have that option here.
So next round will be the first opportunity for Kiva to play Anubis.
Yeah, he could play it for the 7 mana next round, but then that's basically everything that he's doing in that round. And we see Sarcophagus hitting the other Sarcophagus because it got discarded, which is a risk in this matchup. So if Eldrad thinks Kiva's gonna just play Anubis flat, he could imprison it and then play a Stalker But I guess that would only be a tie, and it's a little bit risky. Because Imprison would give his opponent 4 points, and then he would have 4 points also. Instead, we see Sarcophagus going back and forth. So that's a consistent 6, and it's only playing 1 card. It's pretty resilient to any discard options. If that's what Kiva continues to do, this oak will beat it. I guess it will also beat if he plays across Bones plus a Sarcophagus. But his discard pile doesn't have too many broken bones, which are the 1/0 that does nothing. Just because he hasn't been playing his bones naturally, they've just been discarded. So he won't be that much weaker after the shuffle.
So at this point, Anubis will cost no mana for Kiva.
It will cost 7. So Anubis is 12 cards in discard
okay,
pile. Yeah, it's Tumulus that's 8.
I see.
And I think Tumulus isn't in this list. I think in this patch it was just too powerful to play Anubis and Sarcophagus and ignore the other things. Eldrad's probably considering, do I play a Stalker and then pass and then hope my second Stalker is down to 3? Instead, he was probably guessing that the first card is either Anubis or Sarcophagus. It looks like he still loses this. But he is like forcing his opponent towards the shuffle, and he's putting broken bones in their discard pile.
So how is Eldrad able to say that the Anubis would come first?
It's frequently better to lead with a high points card, because you play a card, the opponent plays a card, and you can pass because your card's probably worth more than whatever the opponent's put down. Especially if you know the opponent's list and they just have a bunch of stalkers. What they want you to do is keep playing cards so that the stalkers end up cheaper. So Eldrad was making like an educated guess based on the matchup. And he's also trying to get some value out of Imprison, which it's kind of difficult for him to in this matchup, I guess. There is a Stalker build that feels like it has a positive matchup against Anubis, but it leans much more heavily into lots and lots of discard. And things like Imprison and Oak probably don't end up in that list. So he needs to win here, and Beekeep will put a bunch of bad cards back in his discard pile. That route he would have 9 points. Here, oh no, he has 10 points. So he didn't play the Dinosaur Bones throughout the match. And that's it, yeah. Definitely less interactive than the last match, but that was the tournament. And here we see his list, mostly bone knives and some stalkers.